Thanks a lot for the invitation. I must admit, I'm sort of a lost designer because I thought I trained in classic industrial design some 12 years ago, but nowadays I do a totally different sort of paradigm of design. And I'm also lost because I ended up in Denmark. I originally come from India. And so I want to, before I go too deep into the whole story of what we do, and I think Simon already gave a prelude to that, I just want to go back a little bit in time, in history, and start from almost 100 years ago. I want to start in 1907. There was something that happened that transformed product design forever. And this was not a designer who did this. This was a chemist, a Belgian chemist. In New York, he invented this thing called Bakelite. And it was the first commercial outcome of a long set of research, the first example of a fully synthesized artificial material. And you wonder what this did to the design industry. Right? It did one very crucial thing. It gave the ability to give free form to any kind of product. Before this, products were very definitely designed around material constraints, typically sheet, roll, or tube form. You could cast metal, that was one option. It was extremely expensive and very bulky. Bakelite changed everything. And one interesting example of how Bakelite changed the telecom industry was this Ericsson phone. Recognize this? I'm sure they're in many museums by now. So for the first time, people could freely give evolution to form. It was not designed by technology constraints. It was designed by human principles. The cradle was just the right weight. You could rest it on your shoulder. The mouthpiece and the earpiece were just the right distance. There was a lot of interesting factors. It even had a recess in the back so that you could put your forefingers and lift it and move it conveniently. Pretty well thought through. And it's been personified forever now in this icon, which you all recognize now. Yeah. It's become a piece of history. So the question becomes, what is the equivalent of that kind of creative output today? So is there a new raw material for designers? I don't think it's technology. It's actually data. And it comes in many forms and many shapes, big, small, medium, whatever size you want, it's all available. What you do with it is a more important question, right? So this is where it comes in the picture of my tiny little company, Leapcraft. What we do is user-centered, data-driven innovation. This is the business we are in. And what we actually do on a daily basis is we help organizations, whether it be companies, governments, nonprofits, move from the trap of data to information to meaning. And the information to meaning layer is pretty tricky because it's really the human factors that sort of come into play. It's not technology alone. And of course, you need to master the technology in order to get to the information layer. That's why we collaborate with many companies, Accenture being one of them today. But then moving from the information to the meaning layer is really a question of designer skills. This is where storytelling, visual interfaces, interactions, all that starts playing big roles. And today I want to show you some cases of how this sort of role can transform the landscape of creative industry. And how creative industry can start playing with this new raw material. My team consists of some unusually hybrid thinkers and doers. We have people who are classically trained like product designers like me, who became interaction designers, and then we have people who are computer scientists, physicists, anthropologists, all kinds of interesting people. And the things that we do is mostly work around business models. We work with a lot of sensors. We work with data processing and algorithms. It's a far call for traditional design thinking and design skills to touch this, but I think this is the new frontier where design skills have a much bigger role to play. Yeah. So we fashion ourselves and we envision technology futures, we shape interactions, and our raw material is pixels, big data, advanced materials, and sensors. This is what we play with. And one very important thing is that we just don't solve problems, because problem solving is just one side of the coin. I think there's a whole new era of creating new kinds of opportunities, new businesses, new growth areas. And I think Jon touched upon many of these this morning. That's where the interesting stuff is happening. So, and still, at the end of the day, our process is human-centered and explorative. So we still believe in people and believe in the principles of designing really well thought through interactions for society. So not to waste time, I just want to jump into some examples, some projects that we've done. I think we heard a lot of these earlier discussions and descriptions, especially from Anadate, about this new kind of public procurement models in the city of Copenhagen. And we've been part of many of these kinds of different initiatives, and I have the liberty to show you one of the outcomes from that. We did a very fascinating collaboration with several companies. One is being Cisco, and with another lighting infrastructure company called Cityloom, a French company, and the Danish Technical University and ourselves on thinking what could be the new paradigm for traffic modeling and simulation in the city of Copenhagen. So what we essentially did was install some of these Cisco routers, and there are some pretty amazing pieces of technology out there that can actually help you triangulate the Wi-Fi chips on these kind of cell phones. It's a bit controversial, but still the opportunity is pretty huge. If you treat the data elegantly and if you anonymize it enough to make sure everything is private and secure. So this is exactly what we did. And there's years and years of research in DTU traffic and DTU space to research units inside DTU where they've done advanced mathematical modeling in these spaces. What we did was we glued everything together, created a nice interface, developed the storytelling technique, and looked at what value can the city get out of this. And so we developed an interesting cloud solution platform for this. I just want to show you this quick video from that project.
Cities of today are rising in complexity and congestion. Copenhagen, as part of its Green City initiatives, has embarked on several strategic intelligent traffic solutions to reduce congestion, emissions, and increase safety for both vehicular traffic and bicycles. Advances in sensor technology, cloud computing, and novel simulation algorithms have made it possible to build traffic models based on large-scale data gathering. As part of this project, a consortium of companies consisting of Cityloom, the Danish Technical University, and Leapcraft, in collaboration with Cisco and Silver Spring, have developed a new platform called CITS. As part of the CITS project, we have installed a mesh network of Wi-Fi access points that have the capability of geolocating Wi-Fi-enabled devices on streets without compromising privacy. The data is aggregated, anonymized, and then fed back into a cloud-based software dashboard. The system enables city officials to both monitor traffic conditions in real time and also run a variety of simulations. The dashboard helps categorize traffic, look for patterns, and identify long-term behavioral tendencies amongst the road users. It also allows for gathering insight into correlations between traffic conditions and other influences like weather, roadworks, or special events. The simulation mode enables city officials to test various hypotheses based on historic data trends in conjunction with advanced mathematical models. A variety of simulations can be run as installable apps. For example, assess the impact on a bus route by changing traffic light timings or the change in peak hour bottlenecks based on variable speed limits. The solution also enables the city to record data samples and use it for other applications. We envision a range of new applications that makes the city smarter based on this system. For example, we can change the luminosity level of street lighting in specific corners to highlight bicycle traffic based on calculating the clustering of bicycles and the long-term behavioral patterns of cyclists. This would both reduce the chances of accidents and improve the energy efficiency of streetlights. Another example could be asset tracking and equipment utilization for the city. The system, in addition, can also monitor active RFID tags and thus allow accurate tracking of both movable as well as stationary assets like dustbins, outdoor furniture, public vehicles, and the like. The CITS platform offers a unique cloud-based environment for cities to plan better, work on the basis of actual data, and assess impact at large scale on a continuous basis. CITS brings depth and richness to traffic data like never before.
A pretty ambitious program. There's still a long way to go in terms of a large-scale implementation. That's mainly a budget constraint, which I hear is slowly unwinding itself towards a solution. Here's another example of what we've done with the capital region. Of course, there's a lot of focus and emphasis on healthcare costs in Denmark, being a social welfare model. But the more important thing was to see what could be done about preventive healthcare, because reactive healthcare is still an expensive model. So what we did was that we took data from Rigshospital, one of the big central hospitals in Copenhagen, especially about bed utilization. So basically how many people get admitted into hospitals every day. And then across the whole year, we mapped this information. This little poster is a little bit too small here, but just to give you a little hint, I think I can tell you that, for example, all the number of people who get admitted throughout the year. So this is January to December 2012. This is really young people, so really young infants to really old people on this axis. So now the question is men versus women, the classic debate. Blue is represented by men and women represented by red, some kind of stereotype, which I think some toy company came up with. And let's see what happens. So if you notice, really young boys, they tend to get hurt, yeah, and they get hospitalized pretty often. This is very easy to guess, right? Is what's going on here. Birth, yeah, childbirth. But what's happening with men close to retirement? There's something very puzzling out here. We don't have a clear answer yet. There are all kinds of theories. One of them is that men tend to procrastinate more about chronic conditions. So as a consequence, they get very seriously ill later in their life. And we are yet to confirm this. We don't have data from the general practitioners in order to mix and match this, but we are in discussion with the State and Serum Institute to see if something like that can actually be deciphered out of this. This is just one other example. I also want to talk about this very unusual thing that we helped the city of Copenhagen do, was to actually model what's happening with the bicycles. So hard to predict what's going on with the bicycles. But we all get frustrated when we have to slow down, pause our traffic lights, and again start pedaling. That's really annoying for bicyclists, I must say. Especially in the winter, it hurts. Yeah. So we were really looking into how can we predict something in the space, what can we do in terms of data and sensors and all that. Luckily, the city decided to invest in a few RFID readers along the certain pathways, certain critical streets, and we helped them model this whole data and visualize this real time. So we actually have a live dashboard even today. If you go take a look at this URL, leapcraft.dk/lab bike maps, you can see in real time the dwell time between traffic lights, the velocity in which most bicycles transfer between two traffic lights and things like that. And over days and weeks, we can actually see patterns in what's going on in the city. Another very, very interesting piece of work that we did in collaboration with a company called Works, where we looked at supporting decision-making in the job centers. The Copenhagen job centers, they have a peculiar dilemma. They have a strange issue that there are more and more highly qualified unemployed people showing up on the doorsteps. We discovered somewhere along the way that if you, don't quote me on this, but if you do a PhD in some humanities, basically you're shoeboxing yourself into an unemployable track. But there is not enough data to prove this, but this is just a hunch. Anyway, what we did was we tried to see what can we do to support these people. How can we get these counselors to actually advise, especially young unemployed people, in a better way in order to get them better jobs or find them the most appropriate professional track. So what we did was we looked at a completely different radical data source. I'm sure you know about LinkedIn. I hear that Almost 90% of Denmark is on LinkedIn, so we're close to 4 million plus people on LinkedIn in Denmark. Very fascinating data set. What we did was that we wrote some little scripts and robots that went in and crawled all this data, and we created our own parallel database by discarding all personal information. So what happens is that in a typical person's lifespan, we measure how often they study, what educations do they take, if they take a gap or a break, what kind of professions do they enter, what kind of job titles do they hold, the whole thing. And then we do a bit of semantic modeling on top of it, and then we start visualizing this in some nifty ways. So for example, this represents different people and their career paths over the years, where the greens represent mostly professional activities and the oranges represent educational activities. And we do this not for a few hundred people, but for thousands of people. This is where the fun starts, and you can start seeing some really interesting patterns in the space. For example, over the years, we discover from many graduates from Roskilde University that they tend to get jobs earlier and earlier in their careers, but then they tend to move more jobs very easily. If you graduate from a typical university in Denmark in the 70s, you probably will shift 2 jobs in your lifetime, or 1 most probably. But nowadays there's a different tendency, and there's a lot of options, but the options does not necessarily mean to a better outcome or a better career choice or strategy. So there is more data, there is more movement of people, but it does not mean better job satisfaction or professional engagement. Then you can ask some very politically sensitive questions, like, does additional education or training makes a person more employable? What's your hunch? Difficult one. Actually, we discovered that for certain segments of people, it actually doesn't help to go into advanced educations, especially project management courses and other kinds of secondary courses, which the job center tend to advocate quite extensively, is actually counterproductive. Very difficult data to digest. But of course, this is not the absolute truth, because we need a lot more data for this to become significant. This is just a small pilot that we did for them. Another very interesting thing that we are currently doing, we are trying to reduce air pollution in Copenhagen through our little techniques and our little studio. Ambitious, lofty plans, but a small intervention actually is beginning to show results, and we are able to see some really fascinating stuff. If you're aware, in Copenhagen, there are a few big streets, and then there's a lot of small streets. And there's something really unusual that happens with the small streets. If cars don't move smoothly through the small streets, there's an interesting tunnel effect that happens, and there's a lot of air pollution that gets trapped into these narrow vertical valleys. And as a consequence, air quality for people living in those streets deteriorates pretty rapidly. So the city is very interested in this, on knowing how to deal with this, especially because the city of Copenhagen, we discovered, is way high above some EU standards, especially for NOx, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide, and certain particulate matter. And then we did a long and winding search for how can we do this. So we wanted to work with the city on tackling this issue in our own small ways. We eventually had to design our own sensors. It sounds a bit extreme, but actually we did make our little boxes, which have a lot of advanced sensing capability built into them, and they have network connectivity and remote management and whatnot. I'm very proud of my team for doing this. And then we installed them on the streets in different locations. They're pretty inconspicuous. They're not very big. They're reasonably sized compared to that huge box that's sitting right outside this building. I don't know if you ever noticed this. And they are all wireless, and they send continuous data. We get data every minute. And we built a cloud-based aggregation dashboard for this and a service where we can actually monitor pollution levels in real time. Now we're working further on trying to model this data, and we actually are going to influence traffic light timings to avoid these stack-up or queues of cars and narrow streets in Copenhagen. So that's the next step. We're working with a company called Peak Traffic to actually control the timers and the control systems on traffic lights in order to do this. So saying that, I just want to wrap up saying that there's 3 key values that is transforming at least our business. And I think this applies to a whole cohort of new kinds of businesses that's going to come around. And in our world of thinking, there's 3 transformations that's happening. One key transformation is going from sort of the information to knowledge economy spectrum, and there's one very important thing that's a designer attribute here, and that's storytelling. I think designers are pretty good at storytelling, and I think that's a pretty interesting leap to make. The other thing that's happening is markets are not just driven by need to have kind of paradigms. There's a lot of niceties and frivolous requests also. And that also sometimes seems to drive economies of scale. It's really surprising. Who ever needed Facebook? Do we need Facebook? Yeah, now we do. So the market dynamics around these things are drastically transforming. The other thing that's going on is that it's no longer enough to just make a product. If you make a product, you're doomed, more or less, because you need to create the ecosystem around it in order to drive a product. A product can hardly stand alone. So there's an interesting paradigm shift. You can call it new kinds of business model, new landscapes, whatever. There's a lot of buzz around this. There's a lot of books being written in this space. These 3 interesting combinations can actually open up a whole new field. And if you treat data as a creative approach to raw material, I think it changes the way we think about stuff. Thanks a lot.